Hello and welcome to the JackCast, your Swansea City podcast. I'm Matt Barocco and I'm joined as ever by Steve Carroll. Evening, Steve.
Evening.
It's been a little while. We did say at the end of the last podcast we wait to see what happens. And you know when something happens, you go, there's probably not enough information there to do anything about. And then a little bit more happened. And then nothing happened for about 2 or 3 weeks, Steve, with the Russell Martin saga. So we were just sitting on it, and now all of a sudden everything is happening and we've missed the boat, and now we're going to have to do a bumper podcast, split it into two and send it out separately because there's just so much to cram in now. Every day seems to be a new story with the Swans. Things are starting to move.
Yeah, it feels like it, doesn't it? I mean, we've been a bit unlucky, haven't we? I mean, obviously we were waiting for a certain club to cough up and not piss about. And then around that time, I went on holiday, and then you went on holiday, and it's a case of now we've got to catch up on everything, isn't it? But things have moved quite quickly now with other things since then, haven't they? So a lot to discuss.
Absolutely, I think what we decided, or rather, what you said before we start recording, is let's get this in half, Matt, because we're not going to be able to cover everything. We're not going to be able to do justice to what's gone on if we just chuck an hour episode out and try and catch up on the last 6 or 7 weeks. That wouldn't be fair. So what we're going to do is we're going to go right the way up to Michael Duff's appointment. So if you're not interested in that side of things and you think that water under the bridge, part 2 will be coming and we'll be covering everything since Michael Duff got announced. But there's still so much to talk about from before that time that we were just leaving to build up so we could do a podcast with. So that's what this is. This part 1 is going to be talking about from the end of last season, essentially, right the way through up until Michael Duff's appointment. And well, the big story of the summer, probably the biggest managerial story outside of the Premier League, Steve. In fact, it was covered in discussions all over the country. What is happening with Russell Martin to Southampton? People who aren't involved in either club were saying, has he not gone? It's been going on forever. What's going on? And the whole hold-up was hugely frustrating, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been there before with managers being poached by clubs. It is frustrating. But, it is part of the game, so you just accept it. All you really ask for then is that, the club goes down the proper channels and, everything is decided amicably and there's no arsiness. And it just feels as if Southampton really were piss takers throughout the whole thing, trying to pay less money because of, the wording of a contract, I guess, is how best to describe it. I mean, it'll get sorted one way or the other in the end. But, look, they made an approach, while before the Premier League season had even ended, didn't they? Mm-hmm. And that's when the speculation went really intense. And you're thinking, well, look, you're obviously a Premier League club. I mean, you've been very arsey here. And then it dragged on for so long. And you're just thinking the whole thing needs sorting. So really disappointed with Southampton and the way that they've dealt with it, really. I mean, look, it's when you lose a manager, it is tough to take. And, it is a big upheaval for the club. So you really shouldn't then be, messing about so much. I mean, we look at most of the other ones when our managers have been taken, they have been done in quite a clean way. I mean, maybe the Wigan one was a bit of a hold-up. And I remember good old Brenda being in the news conference on her own because,
that's right.
It hadn't quite been sorted. But most of the others have been, relatively straightforward. I think with Rodgers, for example, the release clause was paid. Sousa, I think we probably couldn't believe our luck that some of the
Potter as well was fairly straightforward.
Yeah, and then, well, I suppose Potter was disappointing, really, wasn't it? But
it was,
But again, Brighton dealt with it, reasonably well, and it was all done and dusted within a few days. I mean, you don't expect this thing to happen within 24 hours, but I mean, it did take over a month in the end, didn't it, or close to about that? And you're just thinking that really is, a piss take. Southampton as well, not a club without money. They put a lot of money in today now with an issue of more shares and the fact that obviously they'll be on parachute payments. They've been on a lot of money in the Premier League, and you just think you're really taking the piss over what is minimal numbers, really, but money that, it sounds like we are owed. So, very disappointed by them, and, I hope they have a miserable season, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it does leave that taste in the mouth. If you aren't aware of the in the details of it, well, first of all, Nigel Pearson would call you an ostrich, but secondly, the argument, as Steve said, was over the compensation amount due 1.25 to a Championship club or 2 million to a Premier League club. Obviously Southampton arguing that they were a Championship club when they actually approached to, or actually offered the contract to Russell Martin. Well, they held off on that in the end because of the argument. I don't doubt if Swans had showed little resistance, they'd have been in that door before the end of the last season and just hoped that we'd accept 1.25. It was the Swans who, to be fair, Steve, they're probably in football circles now, kind of known for a few years now as a bit of a light touch. Tend to take the first offer coming in for players and stuff. We tend to roll over and have our bellies tickled, and the pre-planning and stuff and everything just seems to go out the window, and there's a lot of hot air around what is everything's going on at the club. But this instance, and indeed what we've seen since then, suggests there's a bit of a more a stronger approach and a bit more of a professional outfit going on at the club at the moment. We weren't going to be taken for mugs in this.
No, and I agree with that. I mean, like I say, our approach has been quite poor, isn't it, over a lot of things recently, particularly with players. I mean, players go in at the last minute for knockdown prices, and in football, people talk inevitably, and when you develop a certain reputation, then it can be hard to shake it, and clubs will try and test your resolve in it. But look, we did the right thing. We dug our heels in, even though I think, if I'm honest, I think the club would not for Martin to stay. I think, there wasn't really any talk of a new deal, or I suppose it was mentioned, but there was nothing put to him. I mean, look, I remember when Potter left, as an example. I think Birch put a statement out saying, look, we offered him more money, we offered him a better contract, and we offered to back him within reason of our finances. And you're thinking, well, you can't really do more than that. And at the end of the day, he decided to go to Brighton, and you can't really blame him on that either, because it was an opportunity to go up a division. In the same way that now for Martin, it might not be up a division, but it's going to be a bigger budget. As we've seen today, they've just bought someone from Man City, a youngster, for 15 million. We're not getting near that, are we? And obviously it'll be more money for himself. It'll be the opportunity to work with better players. I mean, look, realistically at that point, it is going to be difficult to keep somebody, but I don't really think we tried. That's the truth. I think that what happened in January, where we didn't bring anybody in, and then Martin did the press conference and effectively blamed the owners, even though he wasn't wrong. I don't think that wouldn't have gone down well, and you get the impression then, don't you, that the relationship really had maybe broken down, and the
writing was on the wall then, wasn't it? You think?
Yeah. The bizarre thing is, obviously, we were on such poor form that could have been sacked. And then obviously we went on a brilliant run, didn't we? And it probably left them in a bit of a predicament, really. But then the predicament was taken away because, another club have come in for him. But look, we did the right thing in terms of trying to hold out for the release clause. I mean, that's what it's there for at the end of the day. Whether we get it or not, we'll have to see. But look, it does feel as if things have, may have changed a little bit. I mean, we'll probably go on to discuss more of that, I would have thought, in part 2, won't we? But look, we were absolutely within our rights to ask for that, and let's hope the contract stands up. And if it does, then obviously, we'll be getting more compensation than we currently are, because I'm assuming at the moment they've settled on the lower one just to sort of get the deal done, and it'll be thrashed out in the courts then a little bit later on.
Well, what's interesting is obviously there are rules around tapping up and stuff. It's one of those things in football which everyone knows happens. It goes on. But if the end result is team A get the money for person A, whatever, from the other team, then it just never gets reported. It never goes any further than that. Everyone just walks away from it. But if Southampton do dig their heels in and say no, and obviously Swans are taking legal advice on this and being told that they've a very strong case here, then if the presentation to the EFL is this person's regulation so and so whatever about illegal contact of a staff member without permission, then you end up in a position where the lawmakers have to decide whether they're going to bend their own law or enforce it. It's a messy situation. And as far as we're aware, it's still awaiting resolution. So I think this is going to go to the courts to be sorted out. The situation with Russell Martin, as you said, Steve, was a messy one. One thing I would really scratch my head over is how an ownership which had fallen out with a manager probably could have sacked him based on the breakdown in the relationship anyway, then had the horrendous run, so had a gift-wrapped excuse to sack him, and then still didn't sack him, and then get to the end of the season, have the upturn in form, miss out on the playoffs by a couple of points, and then seemingly not offer him a new deal. The whole situation has been mismanaged from the start of January right the way through to the summer. Do you think that Russell Martin would have stayed if he'd been offered a contract? Because I have doubts over this. I mean, he'd still have had to have worked with some of the guys that are still here, you know?
It's a tough one to say, really. I mean, look, I do think there's a chance that he may have done. He did seem to really, like it here. I mean, he put out a nice statement. I know people often do, but it did feel like it was a genuine one that when he did go. I mean, but it's hard to say. I think realistically, he's probably done the right thing because the owners here had hacked him off. He's been offered more money, chance to work with better players on a bigger budget.
Yeah.
Closer to where he's from in Brighton. In reality, it's a no-brainer for him. He's probably done the right thing. But I mean, you don't know, do you? I mean, he may have wanted to stay and obviously felt he was building something. And, in truth, I do actually think the way we ended last season, I did feel like we may have clicked because in that run in October, I didn't really feel so much that. I thought there were a lot of games that maybe, could have gone either way and we made them count for us. But I did feel that in that run at the end, and nearly all the games that we won, we did actually deserve to win. And quite a few of them we won convincingly. So, yeah, the penny had dropped to a point. So maybe he felt he was onto something good and may have considered staying. But look, the decision was made for Southampton to come in for him, and then it is what it is, really, isn't it? But I suppose it's a funny one, really, if we look back at his time in charge, isn't it? It's last season in particular, one of the most bizarre seasons I can remember in terms of bad and good runs and not much in between. But then obviously you end up in the middle then. So yeah, I think that's probably how we'll assess it. When there were good and bad things during that time, but I mean, we've got to be realistic about it. Martin did come in when we were in a far harder financial position than we've been for a long time, and we did sort of steady the ship to a point. There were mistakes made, without a doubt, but I think we're in a better position now than what we were when he took the job. I know that might sound crazy on the face of it because we lost the playoff final, but got to remember then a lot of those players were loan players. One or two of them, two of the high profile ones like AU, they were out of contract. So we were in a position really of a big rebuild on a significantly less budget, which is precisely why Steve Cooper decided to walk away, because he knew that we weren't going to be as good and it would have impacted his reputation. So, I do think we've been left in a better position, haven't we?
Yeah, I think absolutely. With the situation we were left in after Steve Cooper left, I think is well documented now, isn't it? You've got the fact that we had all these expensive loans that were returning to their clubs, players leaving left, right and centre, but also we had that brand of football change as well, didn't we, which was significant. And we will talk about Michael Duff and what his brand of football we expect from him in the next podcast. So keep an eye out for that. But there was, when Russell Martin arrived a couple of days before the first game of the season, that a couple of days before, Steve, that was a huge task undertaken there to come into a new club, start building up the squad, and also get them playing back a style of football we hadn't seen in a few years was dramatic. And at times it was too dramatic, wasn't it? And we suffered quite a bit over his tenure there, where players were just not quite at the level he needed them to be.
Well, I remember in the first game, I think it was about 20 seconds into it at Blackburn, then Latibodiere blast one back to Fisher, and I think me and you locked eyes as if to say,
oh, it was Ben. If it was Fisher who was going in, it was Bender, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, of course it was Bender. Fisher wasn't here at that point, was he? First, remember, you wondered, don't you, when a new manager comes in and wants to, change the style of it, is it gonna be a more gradual thing? Like I remember when Martinez came in, like he didn't really have the players at the start. We had a couple of injuries. I remember we played a 4-4-2 with O'Leary and Ian Craney in midfield, which obviously is not really a Martinez thing, but he had to make do, and we didn't really, he didn't go full pelt with his the style he wanted until the next season. And you were looking at the current manager then and thinking, well, what's he going to do? Is he going to, is it going to be a little bit more bitty while he tries to introduce it, or is he going to go the whole hog straight away? And obviously he went the whole hog straight away. And, there were prices to pay for it. But we did, we had good runs and bad runs, didn't we? I think that's a way of looking at it. I mean, but what he really needed was a little bit more backing in the transfer market, not ridiculously, but just a little bit more. But obviously the manager did have his flaws as well. I mean, Fisher, I don't need to say that much, I don't think. Nowhere near up to it. And I'm sure the new manager will take one look at him and think the same thing. I mean, this latter blind spot. Every manager's got their flaws, haven't they? But you do wonder as well sometimes whether we were a little bit guilty of being a little bit over the top and not smelling danger and being poor at seeing games out as well. So there were weaknesses, but there were plenty of good moments, weren't there? I mean, 4 fixtures instantly spring to mind. I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure I don't need to remind you what 4 they are.
The thing is, as you said, he is very streaky, wasn't he, Martin? He'd be, the absolute toast of the town when you're on a winning streak, and all of a sudden then you're wondering where your next points are going to come from because he's fallen off the edge of a cliff. And it was only until the last few games of his reign that we both said to each other, didn't we? You might have clicked here. And to defer anyone who would think maybe, he's changed their view, but ultimately we've been saying for quite some time that this wing-back system is killing us. We cannot play with our wing-backs. If we're going to play with wing-backs, they cannot be as high as Martin wants to play them, because we've got centre-backs then covering wing-back positions. It was a mess. We got turned over time and time again, and outnumbered at the back as well. And it was just crazy mess. And right up until the last 8 or 9 games of his reign, we were seeing that. And then he changed, and then he went to 4 at the back. And I think was Larty injured or suspended, or maybe both. But anyway, you put Harry Darling, and then we went to a flat back 4, and all of a sudden the goals stopped going in, and we had Fisher in goals, which we've obviously pointed out his flaws during his time since he's joined the club. But even in that situation, we found we were a lot sturdier at the back. So yes, there were times throughout his reign where you thought, here it's going to be good, it's going to be bad, but right at the end we thought, actually, if he's seen the light here now, then there's a bright future for us. It's just so typical that we'd done this a week or 2 earlier, then we'd have got into the playoffs, and dare I say it, we'd have been the form team to go into the playoffs, and no one would have wanted to face us, and we may be having a completely different conversation now. Completely different. I mean, it would be a brave man to allow a Premier League manager to walk out of the club. So it would be very interesting to see how
there is one other way I would look at it, and how can I put this? If we'd made the playoffs last year, like in spite of basically the shit show of the ownership in terms of backing the manager, you wonder if that could have been dangerous for the long term in terms of they'd be going, well, we don't really need to do much, do we? Because we got in the playoffs anyway. And we know that looking at this season, for example, if you didn't go up, then it does look a lot harder, doesn't it? And I think the same type of approach could have had bad consequences. So that's one other way I would look at it.
Yeah, I would say to that is we have had a significant change at boardroom level as well that seems to have brought with it a different mindset. And obviously we'll talk about that in more length later on. But in terms of how we seem to be approaching things now, the guys that have come in at boardroom level have let's break it down. Well, the guys that were here, Levy and Kaplan, Silverstein, seem to have let's try and recoup our losses mentality. Let's try and, if we've got an asset here, we need to sell it, we need to make some money back, we need to try and recoup our losses, at the same time keep Swansea bobbing along. New guys that come in, they seem to have a mindset of, we want this team back in the Premier League. We want this team to go up there. The only way this team becomes worth something in our investment becomes worth something is if this team is successful. So in fresh impetus, fresh ideas, fresh motivation, and I'm hoping when we talk about this in a little bit, Steve, that we both think in the same things, that these new ownership or investors that have come into the club have a ambitious plans, albeit within reason and not jeopardising the future of the club, but also with an ambition to move us on. Because if you haven't got hope in football, you've got nothing. So Martin leaves. He's gone. How would you assess his time as a whole? Would you say it was a successful period for Swan? So was he the right man at the right time? How would you look back on his time here?
It is a tough one. I mean, like I said, it's quite mixed, really, wasn't it? But I do think he's left us in a better position than when he's found us, which ultimately is what you always ask of a manager, and I think that is the case. And I think you think of someone like Flynn Downs coming in, and we sold him for big money. I mean, deals like that are quite vital for us, I would say, as a club now. So he deserves credit for that, because Cooper didn't bring anybody in who we were able to shift on for big money, really. So, I think that's certainly one way of looking at it. I know, obviously, we didn't sign Cooper when Martin was here, but, obviously, we're Perot.
Perot, yeah.
Yeah, we're not like, we all think he might go. I'm sure we'll discuss that as well. But, I mean, there's money to be made there, for example. So I think we need a little bit of those type of deals as well. Maybe that's what we've done now with a couple that we brought in this summer. But, those things are important. So I think he hasn't really harmed the long-term future of the club with some of the deals that he's done. I mean, there's doing one or two poor ones. I'll mention Fisher again because it's impossible not to. But, I think you also want to look back and say, were there games that you really enjoyed? And I mean, there were games where we played really well, but I mean, we can't not mention the double doob, because, it's just unbelievable, particularly the two away ones, I would say. I mean, the two best ways in football to win are to give someone a pasting or to win in the last minute. And, we did both of them in consecutive years away to our arch rivals. So, I think it would be very difficult to anyone to look back on that and not think that both of those games are right up there with anything I've ever seen. So, you can't really take them away from us. And, to have a manager who played 4 derbies and won all 4, I mean, regardless of what happens in the future, I mean, that's a very special record, really. So, and their memories that will last forever. And I think, it might take the fixture turn in the other way where, eventually at some point it will, and we will lose to Cardiff. And then you look back at it and go, God, we were spoilt there with 4 wins, and some of them in particular, very special. So, they're going to be, I think ultimately he's going to be remembered, isn't he, as the South Wales Derby king, I would have thought, just to come.
And rightly so. I mean, you just look at the lyrics of the Swansea City song. We're talking about, beating Spurs and with Aussie Ardealers and stuff like that. And you think, this guy's done something that no one's ever done in 110 years. And then, to completely take the piss, he's done it again. And he will rightly go down in Swansea City history forevermore. And, you can talk 30, 40, 50 years down the line. There'll only be one first double. And the story will be told that we went back the next year and we did exactly the same again. This was the era of utter domination. And we were in the same league. This wasn't like Premier League versus Division 2. This was same league, and utter domination. And he will be remembered as time goes by and wounds heal and people stop thinking about the moments we're talking about now, the capitulations and stuff like that. When the dust settles on all that, Steve, you'll rightly go away with one hell of a legacy here.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, look, there's so many great memories we've had down the years. We've been really spot, haven't we? I mean, Valencia will always spring to mind, those numerous victories over the top sides in the Premier League, the playoff final, of course, winning the League Cup. Even back to, in my youth, you think of those West Ham, the 2 games of West Ham in the FA Cup.
Yeah.
I suppose the 2 Autoglass finals, the various other promotions that we had. And, the derby games always play key parts in it, don't they? I mean, suppose a good way of looking at it is if you have a season where you're in the middle and not a lot is happening, those games sort of take on that extra significance because it will give you something to really look back on. And you look at it, really, we had 2 mid-table seasons under Martin, but we've ended up winning the derbies in both seasons. So it just puts that extra bit of gloss on it, really, doesn't it?
It does, and those are the things that last, don't they? And I think, like I say, the Birmingham 4-3 and stuff like that, they'll fade. Eventually, I hope that'll fade from my mind because it just does look short over it. But there was a lot of it was a big mess at the back. I think that was one of the things that, in the immediate aftermath of him leaving, is one of the things that I remember right now is how messy we were at the back. And for a player who spent his career in defence, that baffles me because he was just so open. I know he talked about bravery and stuff like that, but he was shooting himself in the foot week in, week out, and there was seemingly no game management. I think one of the most jarring experiences under Russell Martin for me was Millwall at home, when we were comfortable in the game, 2-0 up. I don't need to tell you and bring this to your memory, but for the listeners, and we scored an own goal very, very late on. And then from kickoff, bear in mind that our whole ethos was keep the ball. And then inexplicably from kickoff, we kicked it straight back to them, almost like a rugby kickoff, straight. And I thought, of all the times where passing sideways and backwards, which can sometimes grate on the fans, and of all the times where you think, actually, now that would be really useful for us to keep passing it about, now in the 92nd minute maybe, and we kicked it straight back to them, and a minute or two later it's in our net again. But things like that, game management, so disappointing, Steve.
Yeah, ridiculous, really. I mean, you mentioned there about, we only just missed out on the playoffs by 3 points, and I mean, that was 2 points there, wasn't it, the Millwall game? And like, everyone will concede goals late on in games and stuff like that, but I mean, to concede 2 in injury time, and obviously it did happen more than once, I mean, you can't really offer up any explanation for that is acceptable. So, like you say, I mean, that Millwall game, we completely dominated it. We're 2-0 up, we're coasting. Yeah, there's always an opportunity that the opposition can get a chance to score. Obviously, they've scored no goal. But then I really didn't get that from Grimes from kickoff, where he's blasted it. I mean, just keep the ball. That's what we're trying to do anyway. So you don't abandon it at the end. I mean, I've seen numerous instances where Man City have been, may have been in a situation they've gone down to 10 men or something like that. I remember once they played I think it might have been Atalanta away in the Champions League. They had Kyle Walker in goal because Ederson had been sent off. And I was watching it thinking to myself, well, surely now Atalanta are just going to put them under pressure, try and test the goalkeeper. And City just kept the ball. They physically couldn't get it off them. And surely that's what you have to do in that situation then. But so to lump it and then, concede another ludicrous own goal, again, ridiculous really. And I mean, I know you mentioned Birmingham briefly, didn't you? And that's the other one where, that's 3 points dropped there, isn't it? Where, again, both of those games are ones as well where we did play very well on the whole. And, the opposition should have been out of sight. They should have had nowhere near an opportunity to bring back into it, but they did. And, like I said, we shot ourselves in the foot, and that's 5 points. That would have got us in the playoffs. So, I think that's where Martin would have to take some responsibility. As you say, I mean, defensively, it was quite embarrassing at times. I mean, some of the soft goals, you always used to look at it and think the opposition don't really have to work particularly hard to get their goals, whereas you felt a lot of ours were through nice moves or a good finish or something like that. A lot of the ones we were conceding were like soft set pieces or, ones where a goalkeeper should have made a save. Just ones along those lines, 2 own goals against Millwall, quite farcical really. And, you can't concede 64 goals, which is what I think we conceded in the end, and expect to be successful. It is going to bite you on the backside. And, if you're going to point at why we didn't get playoffs, that's the obvious reason, because I think only Middlesbrough, Sheffield United and Burnley scored more than us. So that does suggest, obviously, going forward, we were quite good. I know, obviously, Barrow scored 20 goals, but the goals in general were quite well spread out. A lot of people chipped in. So, there clearly isn't a major issue in terms of goal scoring. I mean, you'd always want to score as many as you can, but I mean, defensively, look, as you say, I mean, Martin was a right back for the majority of his career. Look, you can't be conceding the type of goals that we were and expect to be successful. So, and I would have thought of Southampton, if, they're regularly conceding those type of goals, you ain't going to last there very long.
Well, we'll see how whether he takes the Russell Martin we had for 18 months over there, or Russell Martin we had for the last couple of months, which is two very different approaches. But to close this with a positive, one thing Russell Martin did well from the moment he stepped foot in Swansea to the very last day here was his visibility in the community, his friendliness and approachability to the fans, his everything around him as a person was utterly exemplary. And a lot of people could disregard a lot of the stuff that they saw on the pitch, because obviously we had the issues with the board, which were worse than what was happening. And we've talked about that at length. But also that Russell Martin cared, and sometimes he cared too much. Sometimes he's a bit naive in his press conferences, but you could see some things that broke him as a man, and he just thought, God, he's really struggling with a lot of the stuff that's going on. And you cannot fault him as a person in his time here. You couldn't help but want him to do well.
Yeah, I think, it was obvious that he really did care, wasn't it? Like you say, maybe too much at times. I think some of his press conferences, he was, maybe saying too much, being a bit too honest. And you think he didn't really have a poker face, did he? I mean, he's young in his managerial career. I think he is going to have to learn to try and keep his emotions in check a little bit better. I mean, I mentioned earlier, didn't I, about that, the press conference they did after nobody came in January. And, I think from a fan's point of view, given how disillusioned everyone was with the owners, I think, we probably quite enjoyed it and respected him for it. But I mean, for most of us, if you go into a position where you openly slag off your employer, it doesn't tend to end very well, does it? So it's probably not the wisest of moves. And, I think if he'd waited a few days, then he may not have taken that approach. But he did, and, it probably didn't do him any favours, did it? But look, I think he certainly needs to learn that, I would say, from his own point of view. But yeah, look, you could tell that he really seemed to enjoy it here, didn't he?
He mixed in the community as well. You'd see photos out in the city talking to people, football fans and non-football fans, and just a really, really nice, approachable man.
Yeah, he seemed to be, didn't he? Which is great, because not everybody's like that. I mean, we've had managers in the past who, don't even live here, for example. So, and then you're not going to see much of them at all. But Martin, moved his whole family down here, didn't he? And obviously it was a big move for him, considering he's, he was at Milton Keynes, and I think he was still living in Brighton at the time. So, it's a sizable move for someone like him. And, he seemed to really, put everything into it, I would say. I mean, I had the impression that he was a workaholic and was desperate for us to do well. So, that is to be admired, really. But, look, at the end of the day, we're talking about quite a young and inexperienced manager, really. I mean, was he 3.5 years of management, I think? I mean, it's very young, isn't it? I think he would have learned a lot, I would have thought, in his time here, and will take that on to his next job. But, I think he certainly will have the tools there, but there'll be pressure as well, which there probably wasn't with the previous two jobs. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Yeah, it will. It will. And, I wish him well, although I do think that he's on a hiding to nothing there. And I've said this to you, that I think is a chance we might not even play against him. We don't play them until December, do we? And we've already seen them splash the cash. They've just issued new shares. I think you mentioned that earlier on the pod as well. They're throwing money at this, the ownership group. And make no mistake about it. When you do that, you want an immediate return. and at MK Dons and Swansea, his only two managerial experiences, he did not get it right straight away. It took time, and it'll be interesting to see how that works out there. I don't think time is a luxury he's necessarily going to be afforded. So we'll see how that plays out. But of course, our focus is on everything here. And I'm just going to deviate a little bit now, Steve. I know this is going slightly off running order, but I would like to finish the pod on more Swans related stuff. So in the middle of all this mess, and whilst we were talking about what's happening with Russell Martin, what's going on here, what's going on there. Anyway, you managed to escape away to follow the national team, didn't you? And well, I suppose it's jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, really, with having to go and watch that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite looking forward to the break. I mean, obviously, we'd had a good few weeks without going to live football, and the Swans had, the whole thing with Martin, I think at that point wasn't resolved, and he was just a bit like downhearted by it and wanting a resolution. And I was looking forward to what I thought would be a reasonable international break for Wales. I mean, a home game with Armenia that you're expecting to win, and a trip to Turkey where that was always going to be a tough game, but as long as the points were on the board from the first game, you were looking at it and thinking, well, if we were to lose, still in a reasonable position, but obviously we'll then most likely have to beat the same opposition in the final home game. But I mean, it was an absolute disaster, wasn't it? I mean, you can't look at it in any other way. I mean, to lose at home to Armenia, to concede 4 to them, I've honestly got no words for it. I mean, every time they went forward, I thought they were going to score. I think Page picked a side that was far too open, leaving I think it was Ramsey and Ampadu in the middle, and it's been seen before that it doesn't work. I mean, look, I slaughtered Page after the World Cup, and if I'm honest with you, I am fuming that he's still in a job, because he is out of his depth. He is only in a job. Was only in the job in the first place because by default, really. I mean, you can't sack a manager when he's been suspended and is innocent until proven guilty. But then obviously I think they've been masked by the fact that we qualified for the World Cup. But in reality, we were lucky, I would say. When we were over-reliant on one man who has now retired. So, yeah, and I think the FAW have got their heads in the shed over this, and they need to act, because, the chance of top 2 is gone. They're in with a reasonable chance in the playoffs if they were to formulate a decent plan. But with this manager, who'd be lucky, I can't see it. So, a shocking few days, really, for Wales, wasn't it? Probably our worst in a very long time, wasn't it?
Well, you say this, and Rob Page's comments after Armenia said, "Oh, this was a slap in the face for us. We didn't see this coming at all." And I thought, didn't you watch us at the World Cup? It shouldn't have been a massive surprise to him that we weren't firing on all cylinders, and it needed some brave, strong management. It wasn't forthcoming from him, and I found it a bit galling that he was to say something like that after the dismal show in Qatar, and seeing us the way we played. Well, what's the run like now, Steve? It's really poor, isn't it? Was it like 1 win in 10 or something like that? Or I can't remember how long it is, but it's a bad run that we found ourselves on, and it seems to be somewhat oblivious to it. Like everything is like, oh, I thought it would be fine, and not in the rot is a worry.
Yeah, I mean, look, I do agree that obviously when you get into Nations League A and you're paired with the Dutch, the Belgians, and the Poles, look, that is tough. You're not going to come out of that with, you're not going to get loads of wins there. But I mean, look, the issue I think with a lot of the early games in that Nations League was probably that because the Ukraine was also sandwiched in there, we did have to, completely prioritise that, which makes sense. So it's not a surprise that we struggled in those summer games, really. I think when you look at it, the Dutch, we played twice in that period, and we equalised in the last minute and then conceded again. I mean, for that to happen twice is really disappointing, for example. I mean, losing at home to Poland, I would say that's disappointing. You would expect better than that, really. But you go on to the World Cup, and I think not often, it's more the performances, I think, than the results. I mean, a draw with the US at the World Cup isn't a bad result in the grand scheme of things. I did think we were poor, especially in the first half. Second half was all right. I mean, but Iran completely outplayed us. We're talking here about a team that never do anything in World Cups other than make up the numbers. They only qualify because they're from a weak qualifying section. And I'm not being funny, but I think Noel Mooney may have said it, and I went to a while back where they were saying that, but it was 0-0 until the end. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it was, but that doesn't mean we deserved it. I mean, the truth is, they were all over us.
Yeah.
And I think the same was said about England. It was 0-0 at half time. Yeah, it was. We were offering absolutely nothing. So, I think that's what annoys me. And, look, the Croatia game, look, we're delighted with the draw. It's a really good draw on paper.
That was smash and grab, though, that was, wasn't it?
Well, we hung in there, didn't we? Which arguably you have to do. And then we made a chance count, which is great. But, I mean, if you really thought that we deserved that draw, I mean, you're in Cloud Cuckoo land. And, the Latvia game, yeah, we've won 1-0. Wasn't convincing, at all, I didn't think. And, the comment, as you say, about the slap in the face, it was a slap in the face, but I do think it had been coming, probably over a prolonged period, if I'm honest with you. Because, I mean, even if you look back to some of the other games, like before that, like the Ukraine game being a great example, we were outplayed, but we just got away with it, which is great because it meant we went to the World Cup. But it doesn't mean that you're looking at it and thinking, well, this is positive for the future. It's just great for the moment and knowing that you go into the greatest show on earth. But yeah, look, Page to me is out of his depth. I mean, this, he should be nowhere near that job. And, I understand why he got it. 4-year contract, you just think, can't be serious. Who the hell was coming in for him other than Cardiff? And if they had, it would have been ecstatic. In fact, I'd still be ecstatic. But look, I can't fathom it with Page. I really can't. And the worst thing is I don't think he's going anywhere. I think they've got their head in the shed over this. I think the only thing that might result in him getting fired is if we go to Latvia and lose. But if I'm honest, I don't think that. Well, it doesn't look impossible to me. Like, I'm looking at it and thinking, are we going to go there and win?
Yeah.
Really not sure we are. So, and look, what was good about Wales previously was we were hard to beat. It might not be great going forward. Obviously, we did have that. We had Bale that would usually conjure up something. And obviously, Ramsey was, a better player then than what he is now. Obviously, he's on the way down. But there's no excuse, though, for being so open defensively and conceding so many bad goals. So that has to improve. But we honestly just look shapeless, I think. And, the manager, for me, just doesn't have it. It's fairly obvious. And, but unfortunately, the people that it should be obvious to, it isn't. So it is a real problem. But look, there is a get out of jail free card in terms of a playoff. But if they want to win it, I think they need to appoint a serious manager. I mean, big money came into the association when we qualified for the World Cup. Why can't some of that go on to a more high-profile manager? Certainly one who knows what he's doing, because this bloke doesn't in the slightest.
Yeah, and money for qualifying for major tournaments is like gold dust to the FAW in its entire history, really, isn't it? So
but yeah, exactly. Arguably, it pays for itself, doesn't it?
Exactly. I mean, you need to be looking at stuff like that and thinking, this is a new era of Welsh football. It's been that way now for the last 10, 15 years, and going back as far as Gary Speed and stuff. And then you think, Toshak, and you look at that and you think, bringing that to an end because of some stubborn few 100k here or there, whatever, to pay off Rob Page seems absolutely bonkers. And you could reignite. There's still good players there. Some of the youngest, most exciting players around don the Welsh shirt. You're talking like Sir Brennan Johnson and stuff. But you want to be taking advantage of that now and give someone who can give them the license to play and the discipline, so that we don't do what we just did against Armenia and collapse every time we lose the ball. So I completely agree with you. You're obviously the more knowledgeable voice on that. You travel, watch Wales games, talk to Wales fans. What's the general feeling amongst the fans you were speaking to on your trips? Are they all of the same mindset? Is there some that are really believing in Rob Page, or is it kind of people thinking now would be a good time to cut ties?
Well, it's quite rare, isn't it, in football, where you speak to a lot of people and pretty much everyone is saying the same thing. But that is actually the case with this. I mean, I spoke to plenty of people in Cardiff, pre-match, around a couple of pints and stuff like that. The word believers in Page, but obviously people were not really sticking the boot in at that point because nobody was really expecting a loss to Armenia. But then obviously we've gone from there flew over to Samson the next day. We've spoken to a few people. Obviously the general feeling is, very much disillusionment. And, obviously over there then for a few days, it was the same thing. And I remember in the airport after the Turkey game, coming back, and everybody that I recognised and spoke to said the same thing, that he hasn't got it basically. And, I spoke to one or two from the press. I won't name names on this.
Yeah.
But, you can tell they're not really with him. But also, I mean, if you look at the tweets from various people as well who were in the press, it's the same thing. So I really think that in terms of the fans and the media, there isn't as hardly any support for Robert Page. I think people just do it as, he's a man who hasn't got it. And, I think at this stage, people would just be like, look, just make a change and nobody's really going to get on his back too much. But I do think it's going to escalate quite badly if now it gets worse, which it may well do. And like I said, I don't think they're going to make a change. So,
well, I can't believe, I couldn't believe watching it that we were in that game against Turkey for as long as we were. It almost feels like now that the stuff in that we really should have got, could they have 2 or 3 different goals?
Well,
madness. It could have been 5-0, couldn't it?
Well, the funny thing is they didn't actually create a huge amount of chances against us, as much as we were like sitting deep. But I do remember thinking when obviously the goal goes in early on that gets ruled out for offside.
Yeah.
That my heart sunk and thinking, oh my God. Like
that was the open ball, wasn't it?
Yeah, you just think, how is this now going to end? Because even pre-match, I don't know what it sounded like on the TV, but it was very loud in that ground, even when it was half full. And then when it was full, I was just looking around thinking, this is very loud, passionate, intimidating. We're low on confidence. We're missing a couple of players. Like, how on earth are we going to get a result here? And obviously,
throw in a red card as well.
Yeah, and that too. But it was a weird one in that sense. As much as they were all over us, they had the 2 offside goals, and obviously Ward, to be fair, didn't have a great international break at all. I didn't think, but did make a very good save from the penalty.
Yeah,
but they were all over us without really asking too many questions. But I mean, when the game is being played in your half for almost all of it, the game, especially in the second half, you're asking a lot to hang on, and I think what annoys me as well is the page afterwards would have just come out and gone, "Oh, some sort of like defensive masterclass," and they would have gone, "Look, okay, defensively we didn't make it necessarily easy for them, but you're massively reliant on the opposition not taking their chances, aren't you?" Which is what happened for a lot of the game, but.
Being millimetre offside and stuff, and things like that. I mean, you can't legislate for that, and you certainly can't call it tactics if you manage to get him a hairline offside. But yeah, it's it was one of those things you came away from and just thought, well, if he's not gonna get sacked now, then you worry about the Wales's qualification chances going forward, because now would be right after Turkey really would have been a great chance just to say, thank you, great job getting us to the World Cup, yada yada, all the platitudes and stuff, whether you believe that or not, and then part ways. But especially if what I've read is to be believed that it's just a set fee to pay him up, whether we do it now or in a year's time. So it does feel like time is of the essence there, doesn't it?
Yeah, let's be honest about it. I know I went to the World Cup and everything, but and it was great to go to a World Cup, but we all know that the fan experience of going somewhere like Qatar really isn't great.
No.
There's surely everyone is looking at the next Euros in Germany and thinking, well, this is more or less perfect, isn't it? So, a country that's not that far, massive grounds, easy to get around, great for socialising and stuff like that. So to not be there would be devastating, wouldn't it? Especially when you feel like, you are good enough to be there. Now, I know we're not as good as we have been, to pretty much say that we're now out of contention for top 2 at the halfway mark of the group is completely unacceptable. So, and I can't believe that anyone thinks that is the case. I mean, look, I could understand, to be honest, if we weren't in the top 2 at this point, because, I thought we'd beat Armenia, and I did think we may lose to Turkey, especially then when, the likes of Ben Davis, he didn't travel, did he? For example, Brennan Johnson picked up a knock in the game. We had a red card. You put that all together, the chances are you probably are going to lose. But the problem is when you've already lost Armenia, you can't afford to lose. But you're also looking at it and thinking, well, we are going to lose, aren't we? So, I think it's the Armenia one that's done the damage, really, isn't it? I mean, as much as if we had won in Turkey after losing to Armenia, arguably it's the better outcome because Turkey are the bigger threat in terms of qualifying. Yeah. You just can't accept a loss to Armenia. I mean, how can a nation like that score 4 against you? I mean, genuinely, it's like a throwback to the dark days under the likes of Bobby Gould.
It is. I'm going to leave that as the lasting thought of what to assess.
Page getting compared to Gouldy.
Yeah, exactly that. Leave that as the final thought of the page.
All we need now is that Gouldy once had us training in Usk prison and they got locked in accidentally. It's like, can we please do that again and just lock the manager in and then someone else has to take us?
Oh, God, yeah. Well, you know what? people are they can't all not understand the situation. They know the consequences of acting and the consequences of not acting, and those people are paid handsomely to make those decisions. Hopefully they'll come to the right solution sooner rather than later. Let's move back to the Swans now then, Steve, to finish off part one of this bumper podcast and talk about comings and goings pre-Duff. Of course, we were waiting on the Russell Martin thing for so long that we just allowed contracts to expire. And two of those who have left the club are Ryan Manning and Joel Latibeaudiere. I suspect you have very different opinions on these two leaving.
Yeah, just a bit. Well, look, Manning, I think we all felt would go, and I don't think it's a massive shock he's gone to Southampton. I think it's quite a sensible move for him. It'll be, like I say, it's a good move. He'll do well. It's a big loss. We need to replace him. Obviously, that's something we haven't done yet. So, yeah, it's disappointing. I think you do wonder if maybe we'd acted earlier. Maybe we could have kept him. But look, it is what it is now. And I think we just maybe need to learn one or two lessons from that. Maybe we will, given that things are a little bit different behind the scenes. I mean, Latibeaudiere, he could have stayed as a backup and that wouldn't have bothered me. But look, he's not a first team player. I really don't understand why Martin seemed to, pretty much select him every game. So we're talking about a limited player here. And, I don't think anyone's particularly bothered that he's gone. I mean, where he goes will be interesting. But I suppose until he has got a club, then, it's not impossible he'd return. But, I mean, look, the new manager's been with us for a couple of weeks now. You would have thought if he was coming back here, it would have been sorted out reasonably quickly, and it hasn't. So I'm fairly sure that Latibeaudiere will be going somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, look, Joe Latibeaudiere was, he did in the end pick up a couple of sympathetic fans who thought, do you know what, and this is worth mentioning, he spent the whole of the Russell Martin's time here playing as a right wing back, and he's not a right wing back ever, is he? So I think in that sense, he's a limited player, also playing in the most demanding position in our formation. As we've seen, the goals we've conceded down from our wing backs being too high, it is that we've asked a hell of a lot of our wing backs, and he was already limited before that. So it's an incredibly tough position for him, and unfortunately, he was the utility man that filled the gap. We tried, and the club tried, and we had 2 or 3 right backs come in over the course, and they all fell by the wayside, and no one got in above Latibeaudiere. So they're either absolutely terrible fullbacks that we brought in, or there's a blind spot, as you mentioned earlier on. And so I don't think there's going to be anyone's going to lose any sleep over Latibeaudiere going. Wish him well wherever he goes. And Ryan Manning, it's going to be a big loss, isn't it? It's not just, obviously he's a character, but he was decent on set pieces or putting balls into the box. He was very good at, had a goal in him as well. So there's a few attributes of Manning's game which we'd be looking to replace, probably with a couple of players, because we're dreadfully short in that position, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. I mean, there's still a lot better here, of course, which we tend to forget about. But Martin didn't give him a look in at all, did he? I mean, there's a new manager here now, so it is effectively a clean slate. So he may have an opportunity to play, but the fact that he hasn't at all suggests that, maybe he won't. But look, they're going to have to bring somebody in, aren't they, on that side? I'd arguably say that that's currently the key position that we need to recruit above all else, because at least in all the other positions there are sort of options, aren't there? I mean, that and a goalkeeper, I would say.
I knew you were going to finish that sentence with a goalkeeper. But yeah, certainly. It's been very interesting. Did you see the pre-season video out in Spain?
I haven't yet, to be honest.
Well, because they looked like they were doing some triathlon event or whatever. Stephen Bender, you can tell me he's not going to be back till Christmas time. On that video's evidence, I can't believe that's the case, because he was, but I'm listen, I'm no doctor, but he was bouncing around, jumping on the treadmill and jumping back off and running and swimming and looked completely able and mobile. And there was no management in that video of his knee. There was no like, careful, make sure you do this. No, he was just running and jumping in and jumping off and stuff. So fingers crossed, he's further along his recovery than was first feared. But just based on the 10-minute video they put up, that looked like one of the fitter players in the squad, to be honest. He looked very very mobile and very agile, which is something you wouldn't expect from a recovering ACL, would you? So it's very interesting to see that. But we'll hope that he'll be back sooner rather than later. And I do expect the club will dip into the market to provide a cover or first team option until his return. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. But goes without saying, Ryan Manning is an absolute priority to replace now. And interesting to see if now that maybe we were still in discussions with Ryan Manning up until last week or something, Steve. Maybe that was something that was on the let's try and get him back. And when he's gone to Southampton now, maybe we'll see that something happen there, because a lot of things have started happening quite quickly and very much behind the scenes. So probably we will have signed 2 of them before this podcast goes out. So we'll probably be out of date. But yeah, be interesting to see what happens there. It's not just on the pitch where we've seen a couple of changes either. The most significant ones, Steve, have happened in behind the scenes, and some major movement at boardroom level and, of course, on the club staffing level. And so far, apart from one horrendous blip, which we've discussed on a previous podcast from the new chairman, so far things look like they're looking positive. We did say on numerous podcasts, this club cannot be successful until there's a change at the top. No matter what you do on the pitch, we need a change at the top, and a change is what we're getting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, I think ideally what you'd want is like a full sale, but I mean, that was always going to be unlikely. But I think for new people to come in and, to buy shares, and, I think the proof's always in the pudding, isn't it? I mean, I think we'd all had a guts full, and we of what was going on here previously. I mean, leaving managers short and dealing with transfers late on, and, almost feeling like you miss out on your main targets then because you're not acting and all this type of thing. I mean, look, it drives you up the wall in the end, doesn't it? But the things have changed. I mean, you've only got to look at what's gone on really so far. The fact that some players have come in before anybody's gone, then it does indicate change. So I think that's good, really, isn't it? Because, I mean, let's be honest, I think Jason Levy, and in particular, people have genuinely just had a gutsful. And like, it doesn't matter what he does now. People are not having him and want him to leave. And certainly, if he's not going to leave, to be more in the background, because it feels like he's been a big problem for us. So, yeah, I mean, I think Nigel Morris in particular has been successful through his life, and obviously he's got a lot of money. I'm not saying I'm expecting him to, back us ridiculously, but it's sort of good to have someone like that there who, you always think if there's a problem, there is money behind him. So, look, it'll be what their long-term plan is for us will be interesting, won't it? But changes have been made. Obviously, we've got a new chairman now. I think, as you say, the strange statement that he made wasn't very encouraging, but I mean, in the interview that he's done more recently, it did seem a little bit better. And obviously, we brought in a sporting director as well, haven't we? So it feels now as if football people, which is what they've said, are making football decisions, which is vital, really. I mean, we don't want idiots making decisions, which we've had previously. So, I think it just feels now like there's a bit more of a plan there and an understanding of, how we want to go. So, yeah, I think there can be some cautious optimism here.
The thing is, and this is it's completely alien to me, because even in our best years with Hugh Jenkins and Lee Deneen, obviously local boys come good and stuff, saved the club, etc. And we know the backstory. However, they had more than tons of unprofessional traits about them. And Jenkins in particular. I mean, you can talk about Dan James, you can talk about Roberto Martinez going to Wigan and stuff. And there was a lot of stuff where he would be like, he's admitted on, I can't remember what podcast it was I listened to a few weeks ago, but he was speaking on one of those, and he was learning on the job. Of course, he wasn't necessarily someone who'd had years of experience in the industry, and he was learning and picking up and stuff. So every transfer window he'd have, but also he was an open book. Everything got leaked to the press and stuff, that everyone knew each other in Swansea, so nothing ever remained a secret. So this, even in our greatest years, we didn't actually have this sense of, where you think, actually, are we being run now by football people, and are we going to be run professionally? Are we, like some of the signings we've made, which nobody's had a sniff of? They haven't been in the press at all. So are we now being run as an actual football club? Because if we are, I don't know how to take that. I've never seen us be run in that manner before. So it's really interesting. You mentioned the new sporting director. Paul Watson might turn out to be the most significant staff signing in many years for us, because here is a man that knows how to work within a budget and knows how to work with other people as well in football. As you say, he's a football man, and he could be huge for us.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, Luton have been very successful, haven't they, the last few years? So obviously a key part of being successful is recruitment, and so you have to give credit for that, and it looks like an astute appointment, doesn't it? And obviously we should, in theory, have a bigger budget than Luton to work with, so that's probably why he's come here. I mean, if he'd known they were going to go up, he might not have, but I think the decision was made before then, luckily for us. But look, I think it's encouraging. It just feels as if we've got better people in position now to make the decisions that need to be made. So look, we've got to be encouraged, and these things will take time. I mean, we have brought some players in, which we'll discuss in part 2, I think, won't we? But look, it feels like a good signing to bring someone like that into the club, rather than having essentially someone across the pond who thought that Dan James being moved on loan to Leeds was a good move. So it now seems as if we've got someone good and proper doing it, and that's what we need.
Yeah, and I said this at the time. I don't think I said it on a podcast because we haven't brought it up yet. It hadn't happened yet. But the idea of, you'd mentioned Morris there, someone coming in, putting a significant amount of money into the club, 8 digits. You're looking at that thinking, there's no way he comes into this. I mean, listen, it's the worst kept secret in football. This absolute car crash of a football club, which is what we are at this current juncture. And says, I'm going to put in £10 million and I'm going to let you carry on. There's no way he's going to do that. There's just absolutely no fathomable conversation where he goes, you're doing a grand job, lads. Crack on. Here's loads of money to spunk up the wall, or not spunk, or whatever you're going to do with it. Just waste it. Because he's, as you mentioned, a very successful businessman. We're expecting another investor to be announced in due course. For whatever reason, that's not come to the front yet, but he comes in, Steve, and he's going to want to have a significant voice in the boardroom. And I think perhaps that is where the change is happening, the change, as I mentioned earlier on, in mentality of, rather than let's scrape together all the pennies we can and make sure that we, recoup some of our losses, new guys have come in, demanded a significant voice in the boardroom, maybe even overall control, and then said everything that's happening on the football pitch, Andy Coleman now is going to be the guy. He's not going to go across the pond. He's going to be the voice of all of us in Swansea, etc. Paul Watson, recruitment is his say. He can work with Andy, etc. and Josh Marsh. So everything seems to be a lot more localised and professional now, and the upper echelons of the club, it feels like the voices are changing up there as well, which, as I said at the start of this piece, Steve, is what we all said needed to happen if this club was going to have a chance of success again.
Well, yeah, exactly. And, to be fair, that now has happened, by the looks of it. I mean, the proof will be in the pudding, as it always is, because, when you can't make judgments too quickly. But, look, I think the early signs are definitely positive. Things, needed to change, didn't they? As you said, I mean, we couldn't carry on as we were. I mean, I do honestly think that if things didn't change, and we decided to carry on the way that we were going, that eventually League One would have been our destination. Because when you look at the league this year, the relegated teams look tougher. The ones that have come up, I would say that they look better than the ones that have gone down. So, I do think then that if we were to do poor business in the transfer market, could have been a difficult season for us. But I do feel a little bit more optimistic now about things. So I think that's the most important thing, really. That, and as you say, we all need hope, don't we? I mean, I don't want to be going into every transfer window and just thinking this is going to be another shit show here, and we're going to be left short, and we're going to have to struggle to get X amount of points to stay up and all this type of thing. Whereas now, I'm not saying that I'm expecting us to be especially successful, but I just have a bit of hope that we can compete a bit more, and that's what we need, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, if this could happen 12 months ago, after the awful Championship League we've just seen, then you'd have thought we'd have comfortably finished inside that top six. But as it happens, we're having a significant change in what looks like the most competitive championship that we may have ever been in my opinion. Obviously, we were in the Premier League for quite some time anyway. So, but we've been competitive. Look, as you mentioned, the teams that have come down and gone up are all strong, and add into the teams in this league who are happy to go out. Look at Sunderland going in and going big on signings and stuff, and trying to go Coventry selling Victor Gyökeres for 24 million euros, absolutely crazy money. Got money to burn, and stuff like that. And clubs are improving across the board. So we've had to improve, Steve, just to tread water here, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you stand still in this game, you tend to go backwards. And, I think this year would be one of those years more than any other because of how strong this division looks. So, yeah, hopefully that's, we'll soon see, won't we, at the end of August, really, what the situation is in terms of the squad. But obviously there's been changes made. So, it does look definitely more positive in that sense, because I do honestly think that, if this would be a bad year to make mistakes, I think there could be dire consequences if we did.
Yeah, absolutely. And, onwards and upwards. And hopefully that by the time this comes out, there's more news, which you'll have to cram into part 2. We'll finish this podcast with the very sad news that came out a couple of weeks ago, Steve, of the passing of ex-Swans manager John Hollins, who died at the age of 76. Of course, best remembered here for winning the third division title back in 2000 with the most stubborn of defences I think I've ever seen. And of course, the West Ham FA Cup we've spoken about a little earlier on as well. Everything that happened in that era was very much at the earlier times of us following the Swans, wasn't it? And we were just starting to kind of feel the love for it and everything. And thank God, because, I mean, some of those games were hard to watch, but ultimately incredibly successful with, that back three of Freestone, Smith and Bound were incredibly difficult to get beyond, weren't they? So, that is a really sad time for someone who will be remembered fondly.
Yeah, no, John was, I didn't always agree with, some of the decisions he made. I wasn't a big fan of the brand of football, but I met him when I was mascot when we played Cardiff in '98. We won 2-1. I just remember he had such infectious enthusiasm was one of the things that struck me for it. I mean, he did genuinely love it. And then sometimes I used to sit in the East Stand and you'd go up to your seat before kick-off, obviously, and he might be coming out of like the sponsors' lounge, and you'd see him there, and he'd still just be buzzing with enthusiasm. I'm not sure I've seen a more enthusiastic person really as a Swans manager. But I mean, one thing you've really got to give John Hollins credit for is that obviously came in during an era where we really didn't have much to spend. I mean, he didn't make many signings during that time at all. But he really got the best out of what he had. I mean, you mentioned there, Smith and Bound was, probably as good a centre-back pairing as we had for, several years around that time. We had a great mean defence. Then we had, obviously, we had Roger Freestone in the goal, who, I would still say now was probably the best goalkeeper outside of the top two divisions. Not much would get past him, obviously. And, our promotion campaign was built on that, really. We didn't have a lot of flair. We did have Stuart Roberts, obviously, who had some pace. I mean, the other side was Johnny Coates, who, he'd have his moments, but wasn't consistent. And then, a lot of the other team, they were hard workers, when the likes of Nick Cusack and Martin Thomas, and the strikers were prolific. We did have Walter Boyd, who we thought was going to score a lot of goals, but didn't really, and flattered to deceive. But yeah, I mean, you look back on that and think, well, at the end of the day, in our history, we've won only 4 times have we ever won a league title. So one of them was with John, and obviously during that time as well. I think we don't think we had a brilliant start to the season. I think we were sort of in mid-table until about mid-November time, and then we went on obviously an amazing run of 9 wins in a row, which beat the club record. Still stands to this day, and that put us into the frame of the top 3 really, and we didn't look back after that. So, I think for someone like John, you look back at it and think, how many managers have won a league title for us, and how many have got like a club record that you're proud of? And there's not many, and he's got 2. So, that's something great to look back on. And I mean, I think 8 of my first 9 seasons going to the Swans were in the bottom division, and the one wasn't, as much as it was terrible because we got relegated with a bit of a whimper. We did get out of that league because of him. So, like I say, great memories. And, we touched on West Ham earlier. I mean, that was my first away game. I think it was yours.
Yeah.
I was about 11 years old at the time. It was really exciting to go and play, a Premier League side, wasn't it? And, we should really have won the first game from what I remember. We were the better side.
Yeah.
Smith has scored from a header from a Stuart Roberts cross, and we were looking to win. And I know that when I interviewed Roger Freestone it was about 10 years ago now, but he'd actually injured his wrist in training a few days before, didn't say anything. So when Julian Dix took the shot and it squirmed under him, he said, well, I would have had it usually, but, his wrist was in bits, and that's why he didn't save it. So, in normal circumstances, he would have, but look, he wouldn't really change it, because then we got one of those special midweek games at the Vetch, and we finished the job. So, you can't moan really, can you? But yeah, you look back on that and you think, I remember there was a proper buzz about the place when, we did end up drawing West Ham when they're in. Look, I think when you're a youngster especially, it's really exciting to play a Premier League side, and to knock them out was, amazing, wasn't it? And I bet for everybody, they'll always look back on that as being like a really special night.
You won't mind me telling this story a long time, and a change of jobs has happened since then. But my dad was working the day the tickets came out, and for the West Ham game, and he clocked into work and then rushed down the ticket office, got to within like the front 10 of the queue before the ticket office opened, and obviously with a buzzer on the city, Evening Post photographers are there to do their front page of the buzz around the West Ham tie and stuff, and found himself on the story goes, he goes back to work after he gets the tickets, and his boss says, you've been busy this morning, and he made up a bit of a story. Yeah, I've been here, there and everywhere. And the boss pulls out the early edition of the Evening Post, and his face is on the front page, gleaming with the tickets he just bought for West Ham. So he got caught out a little bit there. But I say many years ago now.
I've heard many stories down the years of, how can I put it, blokes doing their like lunch hour or this type of thing, going to queue for tickets for various things. I think that's one. A couple of the Wembley trips and stuff like that, because obviously we're talking in the pre-internet era, that was the only way to get a ticket, wasn't it? You had to
and you're less likely to get caught unless you pose for a photo with an Evening Post reporter, I suppose.
That wasn't the point. But do you know what, I remember that Evening Post edition. I remember seeing your dad on there and thinking, Jesus, he's the first in the queue, was he?
He was,
clocking in, that posing for a photo probably wasn't the wisest move, was it?
Well, he's in full work gear as well, so there was no mistaking what had happened that morning. But yeah, it was good times, very good times. I think the John Hollins memories that I can remember was us just scoring in seemingly every home game at about the hour mark, Steve, and just we take the 1-0 lead, and then we go, and already it's about 65 minutes on the clock, and the North Bank are whistling for full time. They're just whistling every time the ball comes into our half and stuff. And it was still 25 minutes left to play, but it was grab a goal and just become impossible to score against, wasn't it? It was stubborn, and it took some watching, but you kind of had that at the time. It certainly wasn't anything like Ross Martin football. You kind of thought, they're not going to score against us. We were so resolute at the back.
Yeah, I mean, I think for all of our young years really following the Swans, there was always a theme, wasn't there, of us being reasonable defensively, but then going forward, I mean, there was no flair or, we certainly weren't free scoring or anything like that. But the Hollins era probably summed it up quite well, didn't it? The fact that we were just very difficult to break down. But as you say, we often, that year particularly, we often found the goal. I mean, it takes some skill to win a league title and promotion with only scoring 51 goals, doesn't it, really? So,
in 46 games.
Some do it. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I suppose you deserve credit for it, really. But I mean, it suggests in other ways that you've won a lot of games by, 1-0, and you've clung on, haven't you, really? I mean, I think there was one game we beat Northampton 4-1. That stands out because
I remember that. That was on Sky, wasn't it? Like a Friday.
Yeah, it was. I think they put it on Sky because obviously there was a bit of history there because they beat us in the playoffs. But I think even then, I think we had 4 shots on target and they all went in. So we just didn't really create a lot. I mean, stuff like XG wasn't around in them days, was it? But I bet if it was, they'd have been looking at us and going, "How the hell are this lot doing so well?" But
we would have ruined XG. It would have been laughed out of town if they had to prove that we've completely turned it upside down.
Yeah, probably would have. But quite often, I know with XG as well, what they say is that it like catches you up later on at some point, and I think it did the next season. So
yeah,
look, it is what it is. Football was very different back then. I mean, good old Cyril the Swan was in his heyday, wasn't he? Doing the David Beckham kick and kicking various mascots' heads into the crowd. It was a different time, wasn't it? But look, there were some happy times there, and obviously it's sad to hear that John is no longer with us. Really, I think he does certainly carry a place in the hearts of the Jack Army. Certainly the ones that were going in that year, and like I said, the 9 wins in a row, which is a club record, and a league title. Those games with West Ham. I mean, I haven't even discussed the fact I was mascot, and we did beat Cardiff, which is the first time I'd ever beat them live. So look, there's games there that we'll take with us forever, really. So yeah, like I say, sad news, but someone we won't forget.
And there's lots of people listening to this who'll have their own stories as well, because another man who is very well thought of, very approachable, very warm, and as you said, his enthusiasm for the game. And I saw at the time of his passing so many stories on social media about how great a person he was, not just as in the football circles but also just as a human being. So he will be sorely missed. The club have said they will mark his passing at a home game. I suspect that'll be fairly early on in the season, so we'll pay our respects then as well for John Hollins. Steve, that's about it for part 1 of this bumper podcast. That we managed to cram in just about everything that led up to the appointment of our new manager. We will record part 2 in the coming days and try and get everything up to date. God knows how we're going to do it because things are moving fast at the moment, but we'll try our best. But I think we're just about caught up, Steve. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, we've caught up to a point, and I think this is a good time to sort of draw the line. I mean, I think it's, people would be happy to have like the hour odd or wherever long it is to listen to it, and they can catch up then with the other part in a couple of days. But I think just one of those things really, isn't it, where we haven't had the opportunity to record, or we were waiting on other stuff. But now I think we can catch up properly, and then for sure then at some point the season preview will be upon us before we know it.
Oh, absolutely. And if things keep moving at the pace they are, our next podcast is going to have to be about 2.5 hours long because we can't just fit it all in. But there we go. We're going to see what happens in the meantime, and hopefully more signings to talk about as well, on top of the 3 that have already come through the door. We'll be talking about that stuff and everything else that's gone on in the next podcast. Keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. That's going to be coming out in a few days after this one. But from myself and Steve, thanks for listening, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.